Hi folks, Sean Hughes here. I'm going to talk today a little bit about knife making, specifically about handle making. You know, the handle is one of the most obvious signs of a knife, and it's one of the things that people look at the most frequently. You're going to spend a lot of time on the blade, you're going to spend a lot of time on everything else, and then when someone picks it up, they're going to make a comment about the handle. So today, we're going to learn about how to make a handle. Okay, to start off with, we're already done with the gluing phase of this particular handle. This is going to be a paring knife. It's just a very small knife, and so we've already glued it up. And if you don't know how to do all that, then we really need to go back to a different video. So really, today's video is primarily to talk about the shaping of the actual knife itself. So this line right here, those two pieces of wood were square. Now the trick is, and I'd say this almost with any wood, is that those outer pieces are not exactly the same distance. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make the two pieces exactly the same width, and of course I'm going to get rid of the pins there and grind those down to where they're nice and flat. Okay, now this knife is a regular steak knife. You can see how simple it is. I like the width of it though, and so I'm going to try to get the approximate width of it, and I'm measuring from the center out, and right on the edge of the metal it's right at 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so I've got it marked on both sides at 1/4 of an inch. Now what I'm going to try to do is take off most of that on both sides and narrow this thing down. Okay, I'm set up on my grinder. This is it's a Wilton square wheel belt grinder, and I've got a 80 grit belt on here, and this is a wood belt, and so I try to keep my wood belts and my metal belts separate because it really clogs up the wood belt, but this is a great belt for getting rid of a lot of this surface material. So here we go. I'm going to start on about half speed. Really at this point all I'm trying to do is get those pins down to where I can then start moving smoothly across the surface. Once I get those pins removed, then I'm able to grind steady across the surface. Okay, so both sides are ready to go now. One of the things I want to try to do is I want to try to keep alternating sides. One, to make sure I'm staying even on my lines, and I've got to make sure that I don't get mixed up and grind the side that has the lines on it, because that takes off my mark. So I want to just go from the top to the bottom, and I've relatively tried to square up at least one side here. So this one's relatively square, but I still want to check top and bottom, make sure I'm getting the right depth in both sides of the cut. One of the things I want to be careful of is as I'm grinding, I want to make sure that the heat doesn't build up too much in those pins, because they're epoxied in there, but they're not peened in yet. So I don't want to have a huge buildup of heat. But as you can see, they're fitting in nice and flush. So I've got a nice smooth grind that's going all the way across, and I'm almost down to my level. So that's just about right on both sides there, and then I'm going to have to do the other side and then match it, and then I get to peen it. One of the rules of my philosophy of knife making as it is that I can always take more off, but I can't add more on. So I want to get it down to that line, and I want to stop at that point. I don't want to go any deeper, knowing that I am going to make this narrower than what I've gauged. I've actually gauged it a little bit larger than what I want. So that first line there is really my starting point. It's not my end point. Okay, now I'm down to my line on both sides. It's nice, it's even, gives me a nice even surface to work with. So what I'm going to do next is I've kept the paper template that I used. Now I'm going to use this same pattern though, and I'm going to line up and I'm going to find where the edge of my blade is. Okay, I'm ready to go now. First thing I want to do is I want to cut this notch out right in here. So I'm going to use the wheel up here, and I'm going to use that as a contour. I'm going to try to get down to that, and then I'm going to contour the bottom side of the handle. Top side of the handle I can just use the flat plate. Okay, one of the things I want to do at this point is I want to get it down to the metal, but I don't want to get into the metal. So I want it to just barely touch. When I feel it, I'm going to back off a little bit. And you'll be able to feel it, you'll be able to hear it
and it might even spark just a little bit. So once I hit the metal, I want to stop, and I want to make sure that I don't start grinding the metal. Okay, I've got a good line of metal going all the way across there, and of course the metal gets scratched up as I'm doing this, so I don't want to do it too much, but remember, I'm going to be hand sanding this at the end. So you can see right here, it's really hard to tell where there's metal and where there's glue until you get down to the metal. So you have to see that shine there, you have to see the shiny metal part before you know which is which, because they're so close together. Now we're ready to get to the very end right there, just right by the ricotta. So this part here has a thumb, or has a finger grip, and then it comes out and flattens out. So I'm going to use the edge of the belt over here. First off, I want to adjust my tracking to get my belt all the way over to the edge, and then I'm going to work that edge just gently like that. Okay, one of the things that I have heard, and I've learned a lot by watching a lot of YouTube videos, as you're doing right now, is never be in a hurry. Take your time. If you're in a hurry and you're making a knife, you're going to make mistakes. So I'm looking at this, and on one side they look to be pretty even. On the other side, this top part definitely appears to be thicker than that bottom part. So it looks like it kind of thickens out on this end. So I'm going to try to make some adjustments, make some marks, see if I get that thing leveled out. Now I've got my handle and it's ready to go. It's even on both sides and it's ready to be contoured. Before I do the contouring though, I want to peen these out. I want to make them flatten out just a little bit to where they're gripping, to where they're holding that wood together on top of the epoxy. So now, at this stage I'll tell you that this is one of my absolute weakest points. I don't really know exactly what I'm doing here, so you might want to go look at a couple of other videos with more professional people to show you exactly what to do. But what I like to do is use a flat punch. Gives me a nice flat peen there. So I put that on there, and it's on an anvil. I want to get it hard enough to flatten out, but I don't want it to punch through or anything. Okay, the last step I can do is I want to use my ball peen hammer, because I want it to flare out a little bit. So I can use my ball peen hammer and hit it with another hammer to flare it. Okay, this is perhaps one of those trickiest sections that I've got to do, because this is really done entirely by hand. If I put guidelines on here, they're just going to get ground off. So I've learned not to even bother with the guidelines. I'm just having to do this by feel and by eyeball. So as I go, I'm going to use the flat part of the belt here, and I'm going to grind, and I want to make this thing relatively contoured. Now I want a little bit more of a gap there for the finger. So I want a little bit more to go in right there. And I want that equal on both sides because my wife is left-handed. So I'm going to use this corner of the wheel up here to try to get some of that in there. And I'm just going to keep working it until I feel pretty comfortable with it. Alright, so I've got it roughed out and I've got it to where it looks pretty good. I can see the metal all the way across, and so there's no place where there's glue showing. And so the contours are pretty good. They fit my hand nice and comfortable. It feels pretty good. Now comes the sanding stage, where I actually go from this point into hand. Also, you notice my pins are still looking good, even though they've been peened. So they're flared out inside there, but the surface of them looks nice and smooth. I'm going to start with a 100 grit and just start working the rough edges off of it. Also, you'll notice there where I had to cut in with the belt, it gets pretty rough in there, so I want to try to get down in there, and that's what your fingers are good for. Your fingers make a nice little contour tool. So I don't use a sanding block or anything like that. I just use my fingers and just keep on going. I start off with a 100, and then I'll go up to 150, 220, and then probably jump up to a 400 at that point. 400 or 600 is probably enough to make this thing nice and solid and smooth, and then it's time to finish it off. I fold the paper up and work it in that groove there, and that gives me a little bit of strength on the paper to get all the way down there, and I want to get all that glue out. Okay, I run into a bit of a problem here. I want to explain it to you. This section right here still has a little bit of glue in it. I thought it was just a little bit, so I got my tool out and I'm digging in there, and I can tell that's going down quite a ways. So I'm afraid that hand sanding isn't going to get enough of it out. I'm going to need to take this belt back to the belt grinder and grind out that little section right in there as best I can. So I'm going to try to score it with my tool and clean out as much of that glue as I possibly can, and you can see how deep it goes down in there. So I'm going to need to get onto the belt grinder to get it all out. Alright, that took a lot of grinding there, but I was able to get it all the way down to where it in there. So I need to take just a little bit off right there. So I'm going to go to my 1-inch belt grinder here, and I'm going to try to go just a little bit right there and a little bit right there. And this is a 150 grit belt that I've got on here, so it's going to hopefully will work out pretty well. Okay, we're ready to get down to the final stages. I've got 2 different grits here. I've already gone all the way up to 150 on this, and it looks pretty good, feels pretty good. I'm going to touch it up with a little bit of 220, and then I'm just going to lightly sand it with some 400. And now that I'm done with the handle, I'm going to take some of this tack cloth, and I'm going to clean off any of the residual that might still be on there from the sanding. So I'm just going to try to bring out the color of the wood with just a little bit of tung oil. And so I'm using the tung oil that's a high gloss tung oil. And so I'm going to put that on the handle here. You notice I've got the knife into the vice grip. Also notice that there's wood in the vice grip. The wood plus the masking tape keeps any scarring from happening on that blade. And that's really important at this stage because the blade is nice and shiny. You don't want to do anything to mess it up. I think that's a good looking handle right there. Something that's going to be durable. And the tung oil, the important thing about the tung oil is that it is food safe. So this will be good for the kitchen because you're going to be using it to cut various things. And this is a working knife. This isn't a show knife. This is one that's actually going to be in the kitchen being used. Here we are down at the final stages, ready to take the tape off and see what the blade looks like. Before I do that, though, there's always going to be just a little bit of glue that gets in between the handle and the steel. So I like to run a razor blade just right over that so that I can cut any of that glue, any of that epoxy off of there. So that's all I'm doing there, is just gently scoring that. Start unwrapping and let's see what we got. Alright, looks pretty good. I've got just a little bit of tape in there, so gently I'm going to go this way, and hopefully that score line that I already established lets me pry that up and take it off. Well, we're completely done. This is the final product. It is a very nice handle. You can use the same principle for any handle, whether it be a hunting knife or any full tang handle. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something about it. Hope you learned as much as I've learned from watching other videos right here on YouTube. Thanks for joining me.